All right, good morning, everyone. I'm gonna go ahead and get started, and I'll start with just some house rules to help everyone. So we'll use the raised hand today, but we really want you to be engaged. So feel free to just speak, unmute yourself when you have a question or you want to engage in conversation. Please feel free to do that. Throughout the session, you're able to use the chat if you feel more comfortable typing in your comments. Please type them and then I will read those. Please just engage today. This presentation is for everyone. So we just really want you all to feel comfortable to speak out, and you can use the chat as you feel uh, the need to. And when you're not speaking, if you will remain on mute. And I think I can see everyone's name. If you have not typed your name, please type your name so I can know and the presenters will know who they're talking with. And in the chat, go ahead and write your name. I see we have some people who have already did that. Thank you, Tisha White. White, put in the chat where you're from, the organization you're representing, so we can get a better feel for who we're speaking with today. I see Arrow Academy is present. Thank you. Jenny Bitzer, thank you. Amy Wallace, she was bright and early. She was our first one here today. Thank you, Amy. Okay, Miss Mayfield. T. White lives in Memphis. Thank you. We're glad you're here. I'm ready for the next slide. Today, Together We Can. This is our second part series. And so we had this conversation 2 weeks ago. And so today we're continuing that conversation. So we're very excited to have ANET with us again, Achievement Network, to lead this conversation. And so, as I stated, please go ahead, feel free to keep typing in the chat. I see we have the Southeast High School in Nashville. Thank you. So that is awesome. I'm ready for the next slide. Thank you. And so I am Joshua Perkins, and I am the Director of Quality Schools here at the Tennessee Charter School Center based in Memphis. And today we have two great speakers from the Achievement Network, which is Vaughn Thompson, who is the Executive Director, Partnership Development for the Southern Region. We also have Katie Tabbert, who is the Director of School Support for Tennessee, Alabama, and Florida. So we're very excited to have you, and I want to go ahead and thank them now in advance for being present and putting this great presentation together for you all today. Our objectives today is to understand the importance of access and equity in math instruction, learn protocol to support instructional recovery within the context of your curriculum, begin long-range planning for next year to ensure that time is held for instructional recovery. And so, as I've stated, please, we want you all to be engaged with us today and talk, and whatever comments or questions you have, please feel free to do that. Our presenters are ready to answer those questions. And so I'm going to pass it over now to Vaughn Thompson. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me pretty clearly. I am super excited to join you today. Excited to talk to you about the work of instructional recovery and really engage with you on this call today. First thing, I just want to introduce, if you don't know or have not worked with or have not heard of ANET, just want to talk to you a little bit about the Achievement Network and really just talk about like our mission and our excitement of being able to work alongside school leadership teams to strengthen their practice. The work of really supporting schools and school leadership teams using standards and data has been our work for now close to 15 years. And as a national nonprofit, we believe strongly in the idea of educational equity, really thinking about all students, regardless of zip code, regardless of labels, regardless of any of the factors that are attached to them. We believe that all students with meaningful support should be able to reach the common standards through high quality instruction. So in that equity vision, I do want to stamp also that our organization has been on a journey and will continue to be on this journey around a commitment to anti-racism and really understanding the systems and structures through our landscape that needs to be disrupted in order to ensure that high quality instruction, culture, practices, and leadership actually is there to guarantee equitable instruction for all. We believe this not just as a fad or a thing that we really want to say during this time, but also really are on a journey to really think about those practices. And we really believe deeply in this work. So as we move to the next slide, and I think you'll hear some of this language throughout the morning. The first thing I really want to talk about is this idea of equitable instruction. And so connecting to that idea of all students and what does it mean for all students? I'll give you just 30 seconds to just kind of read this first portion of the slide in terms of equitable instruction. Let me pause for a second, have you read, and then I'll chime back in. So even as you're reading, I think things that really stick out to me are first and foremost about the expectations that we hold for our students. All really means all. And I know sometimes that can be a challenge given all the circumstances that we do know, but we really want to hold that bar up that all really means all. Um, that within our school structures, the culture of the classroom, the principles of of how we provide high quality instruction, the impact of the students and the work that they do in the classroom, all leads to us really having a strong belief around equitable instruction. And part of that is about math. So in the next piece of this slide, as you'll see here, we're connecting this idea of equitable instruction, particularly to math. I don't know if you've seen some of the recent research, but there's this idea that post-COVID slide, the challenges in math instruction are going to be really deep. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So I really want folks to really think about equitable instruction, about what it means for all students, but also when you think about math, the alignment to the shifts. And so what does that mean for focus and coherence? What does it mean for all of us to prepare and think about unfinished learning as it leads to equitable instruction when we're thinking about focus, when we're thinking about coherence, when we're thinking about the aspects of rigor, the balance of conceptual, procedural fluency, and application, and how those standards of mathematical practice have to be adjusted in our classrooms. So I want to pause again, and there's a question in the corner of your screen, and we'll ask folks to engage both in the chat and particularly come off on mute in a couple of seconds. But how does this connection to equitable instruction currently show up in your work? Even more importantly, what is your role in this idea of equitable instruction? I'll give you about 30 seconds to kind of think of that, and then you can either jump in the chat, or we would love for some folks that are on the call to chime in and give an answer. I'll pause here. So I know we're a small but mighty group this morning. So just love to engage. I think it's helpful in conversation. How does this show up in your work? Like, what is your role in this? I would just love to hear maybe one or two responses to get us going this morning. Who's going to be the brave soul to start us off?
Hi, this is Andrea Mayfield from Arrow Academy. Can you hear me?
I sure can. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I am five, and I am the principal at the school. Um,
Awesome.
so my role is really to kind of facilitate all of this that we see
Mhm.
on the screen. And so,
Yeah.
not only should I have an understanding and have expectation for this, but making sure that my staff understands and there's some sense of how do we monitor or how do we make sure that these things are facilitated for students. So not only are we looking at, the planning, but also making sure that those plans reflect actual practices that we see within the classroom.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Andrea, for sharing that. I harken back to the days when I was a school principal and how much of that work was about me being the keeper of the vision and like the chief communicator of that vision. And though I try to, well, I love math, so I really, dove headfirst into math. But I, with so many other things on my plate, I wasn't necessarily expert in the standards, right? But the key communication or the vision setter, I should say, is a part of that role. So I appreciate you calling that out. Anyone else want to either in the chat or via comments chime in? I just want this to sink in because I think this is part of the foundation for the entire session this morning. Any other comments? Okay, no problem. You're going to have plenty of opportunities to engage, so I do want you to get ready. Yes, go ahead. Did I hear someone?
This is Andrea again. I was just kind of looking at the one that says students shoulder the cognitive lift and share think. I
Uh-huh.
think that is one area where we're challenged at, but we're trying to work better at because sometimes teachers always feel like they have to be the one to
Yes.
drive everything, trying to move it to more student centered or where students and little, even though we have little kids, but they still have a responsibility to their own learning. And of course, that has a direct impact on student achievement.
Absolutely. And also, what is that cognitive lift and students owning their learning? Like, what does that mean at lower grade levels as kids get older? But also, what does that mean for all students? Like, sometimes we have an expectation that it's about, the students who are most verbose or the students who can articulate themselves. But how do we push those others who might be shy or might not be used to sharing their thinking? How do we plan in a way that draws teachers away from them being the sage on the stage, but actually like really engaging? So thank you for those comments. We can move to the next slide, and keep that energy going, because what we're going to do over the next few slides, even as I pass it to Katie in a few, is really talk about unfinished learning and how to address it. And even on the next slide, you'll begin to see here and think about some of the learnings that we have resulting to this. I want to pause. I want everybody to read. Um, I'm going to read it out loud, and I want you to kind of read here this short letter. It says, "Dear parents, don't stress about schoolwork. I will get your children back on track. I am a teacher, and that's my superpower. What I can't fix is social emotional trauma that prevents the brain from learning. So right now, I just need you to share your calm, share your strength, and share your laughter with your children. No kids are ahead, no kids are behind. Your children are exactly where they need to be. With love, all the teachers on planet Earth." I don't know about you, but that's powerful to me. I've read it a few times and I've actually said it out loud a few times, but just the whole energy, I think, around, we are all worried about kids have missed school. That means that they are behind. But I think there's some ways that we can really codify and really think about what does this mean for unfinished learning. But I also love about this, it's also allowing us to embrace this fact that we are teachers and we know what to do. We are equipped. We understand how to be able to ensure that our kids are going to get what they need. Just real quick before I move to the next slide, any quick reactions, and feel free to use the chat. I think it's very much okay for you to chat in your comments there. But I wanted to pause and make sure that we also both understood that energy around the fact of kids have interrupted learning, but we're also equipped to really catch them up. And we will rally together to address it. Let's move to the next slide. And so as we begin to think about, like, how do we get our kids where they need to be, I want to surface some really, I think, important common definitions related to learning loss due to COVID-19. And what does it mean for unfinished teaching and unfinished learning? So first thing I want to talk about as we click through this slide is about unfinished learning. This is just the idea of what's the content and skills that we have introduced but not yet fully mastered. And that could include a number of reasons why it's not mastered, but I don't want to assign any blame to that. I just want to name it that this is unfinished learning for our kids, for our students. And then next, you hear this idea of unfinished teaching, right? So we went through the year somewhere around March, school started to be interrupted, and there was content that was just not introduced. So that allows us to say, okay, we had some unfinished learning. We also had some unfinished teaching, and that was just due to the pandemic and the interruption of the school year. And then next, the other ideas that we're talking about is just natural learning loss, right? Like we all know, if you've been around school any amount of time, that when kids go home over the summer, at least I could speak to my child, over the summer, he tends to act like, school never happened the previous how many ever months. And so sometimes there's some natural learning loss. And so all of these things, whether it's unfinished learning, unfinished teaching, natural learning loss, have a compounding effect. And we believe it's more impactful to look at this effect in the circumstances that we have presented with COVID-19. And so the last thing I'll say is we also need to understand that there is a lever of support that needs to go to our kids who are in the most marginalized populations and have a specific set of circumstances. And so as we talk about it, I'm going to pass it to my colleague Katie, but as we talk about learning loss, I want you to think about unfinished learning, unfinished teaching, natural learning loss, and the compounding effect on those who are most needy. So I'm going to pass it to Katie. I hope these few slides have been beneficial for you to kind of situate the work, and I'll pass it to Katie to take us a little deeper. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Vaughn. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. And there was a couple of people that may have joined in the last few minutes. So if you have joined, please feel free to type your name and what school you're in the chat box. We'd love to connect with you and make sure that everybody is able to engage and participate in the conversation. So one of the things that we had kind of talked about in our last session was the idea of creating some sort of a plan, and we've been referring to it as an instructional recovery plan in order to recover this loss of learning that Vaughn was discussing in the previous slide. And so a strong instructional recovery plan includes a few different components. It diagnoses the efficacy of distance learning efforts. And so thinking about what was occurring in this virtual learning space, how effective or ineffective was it? And the idea behind that is we need to figure out where we left off, and we need to figure out how we go forward. It also maintains a focus on this major work of the grade in math specifically, and then the elements of proficiency in reading and writing. And so thinking about what standards were mastered pre-COVID, what standards do we need to actually have built into upcoming instruction so that we can remediate effectively. It also leverages a lot of data. And so let's take a look at our data here. What does our attendance look like? What does our engagement look like for the virtual sessions? What sort of data, what story was the data telling us before we went on this virtual learning hiatus, I guess? And then if you think about incoming data, so what data are we going to use to diagnose where students are at? There's another piece here, and somebody kind of chatted this out a little bit. I think, Andrea, you were talking about de-stressing parents. We need to make sure that in this plan, we're planning for support and learning for adults. And so that looks like what opportunities for development for teachers, for leaders in your building, people on your ILT, but also thinking about parents as well. If we are in this virtual learning space, what would it look like to provide support for parents, knowing that their content level is not what the teachers in the brick and mortar schools have? And so how do we support parents in this? And then finally, this component of SEL. So how do we support staff in maintaining an emotional balance and stability for both themselves and for students? So a lot of work around SEL. So we kind of unpacked a few of those key components last time in the instructional recovery plan. What we're going to talk about today is one specific approach to how this learning loss recovery could work in your buildings. So the slide that you see on the screen is one that we had up last time that kind of struck quite a few people around this idea of stop and drop versus just-in-time intervention. The first impulse of schools in planning and recovery is often to have teachers pick up with a review or part of all, of part or all of the prior grades. So they're actually, some teachers will actually pick up exactly where they left off in the previous school year. But if we followed that approach, we would lose out on approximately 2 to 3 months of grade level instruction, which is where this piece falls off. We actually end up running out of time and we don't have enough time to complete grade level instruction. So with just-in-time intervention, we can leverage the coherence of the standards and weave those into intervention throughout the year when it's needed. So a teacher might actually strategically choose to place a lesson into their curriculum that's going to help students access that grade level content, or they might just select some sort of a do now task that again is aligned to a prior grade level standard, but allows students to have access to that current grade level work. Next slide, please. So when we think about this idea of just-in-time intervention, there is kind of an unpacked model of what this could look like on the screen. I'll give you just a second to take a look at what you see here. So the model that you see on the screen is kind of a visual of how we leverage that coherence piece. We know that's an issue of equity as we weave interventions in throughout the year. So the vertical bars represent points when the teacher is choosing to insert whole lessons into prior grade content. And then the horizontal bars are places where the unfinished learning is being addressed within the context of that grade level work. For example, by inserting some sort of a do now or introductory task into that lesson. This isn't just a theory. This is something that's gained traction over the last few years as more and more strong results come in from schools and systems that try this approach. And an example of this is on the box that you see. Louisiana brought a group of 2,300 students from 33% proficient to 65% proficient within 1 year of intensive Algebra 1. So just-in-time intervention was a key component of the model that they used. So we're going to spend our session today learning how to do this within the context of the grade levels we teach. I'd love for you all to just chat out or come off mute. Have you used a technique like this before? What did that look like? Let's share out our thoughts out loud or in the chat. I know there's a few people that we haven't heard from yet. I'd love to hear from everybody on the call, so please come off mute or chat in your response.
this is haven't just like used it specifically, but in our curriculum, well, in our daily schedule, all our teachers did, like morning work. So during that morning, it was sort of to kind of like check in instructionally with the students, kind of know where they were, or even if it was like a review skill or a kind of introductory as they kind of move through the week and plan lessons, just to give them a taste of the students. And then this was kind of hashed out more when they went to learning centers, and definitely using data to help them during, RTI intervention time.
Good. Can I ask you a follow-up question, Andrea? And thank you for being so brave to volunteer again. I appreciate it. My follow-up question, I'm just wondering, like, what sort of prep did the teachers have to do in order to build something like this into their morning lessons?
When they did lessons and they used like exit tickets, those exit tickets would kind of sometimes prompt, that morning review for like the next day. So they use some of that to kind of help prime them to like, yeah, this is something I need to review, or this is something that maybe we need to go back into small group or to kind of address.
Great. Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's the heart and soul of data-driven instruction, is actually responding to data, within 24 hours of receiving that data and taking action on that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Andrea. Are there others that wanted to share? Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So there's a lot to digest on this slide. I just wanted to share this as a technical approach to addressing the idea of unfinished learning due to COVID, the COVID slide. I'll give you a second just to kind of pre-read what you see here in the bullet points. So one approach to this just-in-time intervention is designing this, begins with understanding the focus standards of the upcoming lesson. And then connected to that, being able to identify what those prerequisite skills are that students will need to have an understanding of. And I'm very intentional with using the word understanding, because students do not have to have 100% mastery of prior grade level standards in order to access current grade level standards. They need to have an understanding of what that specific skill is to have that entry point. So that's really important to understand, because I think a lot of times teachers see this as a monumental task of saying, I have to go back and reteach every single standard, or holistically this entire standard, which could realistically be 3, 4, 5 weeks worth of instruction. We need to help teachers understand that it's just-in-time intervention, specific skills that they need to access current grade level content. So we then recommend the use of diagnostic data or other formative assessment data to determine, where those gaps exist, and then take action. The data is going to tell a story of whether we need to address the unfinished learning in whole group, small group, or more individualized instruction. Next slide, please. So where should we start? A lot of times we start with really building in extra supports for our tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. There's power, though, in strengthening this tier 1 instruction versus relying on intervention programs, which are often not taught by math experts. I worked in several schools before coming to ANET, and the interventionists were not certified in math instruction. Maybe literacy instruction, but maybe not math. We want to layer onto this the fact that we have limited time and we have limited capacity. So just thinking through this model, if tier 1 instruction is not strong, then it's likely a large number of students will need additional support to address unfinished learning. And in this case, we suggest focusing on improving the effectiveness of tier 1 instruction first. Because if that meets the needs of 80% of the students, then there's less students requiring tier 2 and tier 3 instruction. So there is a benefit to strengthening this tier 1 core classroom instruction and helping teachers being able to remediate just in time. Next slide, please. Yes, Vaughn, I like that you just named that. Leaders should address the adaptive mindsets required to move educators from low expectations tied to student learning. That is ultimately the root cause of that. Do you want to kind of speak to that a little bit, Vaughn?
Yeah, I just know that, you know, a lot of the schools that we've been supporting very deeply with this issue, I would say over the past couple of months, even during COVID, and even as we are supporting schools as they plan instructional recovery for the coming year, one of the things I've heard principals say very clearly is that some of the practices that have been surfaced as great practices around intervention, around pacing of instruction, are not that great considering that they're rooted in this level of like low expectations. And it's not that people purposefully say, well, you know, my kids can't, or they're, you know, are saying derogatory things. It's just this idea of, well, my kids have been home and they've absolutely learned nothing. And so therefore, when they come back to school, they're going to be empty vessels. That's not necessarily the case. And so I think approaching this work from an assets based perspective versus a deficit perspective is a really important piece of the work when we're thinking about how do we plan for instructional recovery. And we're happy to go deeper with leaders on these issues as we've supported schools. But I just wanted to name, let's not forget the mindsets associated with the technical work, which is what you're sharing here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. I think that's important to keep in mind. Let's pull up and reflect for a minute, because we've had a lot of conversation around equity, thinking about this idea of intervention, understand, diagnose, take action. What's bubbling up for all of you right now? And there's 2 prompts on this screen. I'd love for everybody to respond to these in the chat or come off mute. So I'm going to ask that everybody engages in this reflection right now. I want to hear from you guys. What structures do you currently have that make this recovery of lost learning possible? And this is a big question with a lot of the schools that we're working with right now, what structures will need to be created or revised? And so thinking about, how do I recover this loss of learning? What does my intervention schedule look like? What we had before likely will not work come August. 1, we might be hybrid or we might be virtual, right? 2, we might need more time to recover the loss of learning that's occurred based on what the data is telling us. There's another question here too, just thinking about what communication has been shared around learning loss recovery with your ILT, with teachers, and if there's shifts in what you need to be saying to them or what you need to be asking them to do. So I'd like for everybody to take a couple minutes to reflect on these questions, and please engage in the chat and or come off mute if you'd like to share out loud what you're thinking at this point. And again, please feel free to come off mute or chat your responses. If you're currently typing, I apologize, but I just want to make sure that everybody is able to respond to these questions.
Oh, it looks like I see someone had me. Maybe they want to elevate that comment, but if not, then I had a wondering for the group.
Yeah, Tisha, why don't you go ahead and then we can ask Andrea to speak to that.
Sure. Okay. When I'm a former principal, good morning, everybody. And one thing that I've been talking with the team about is just putting myself back in the seat of a principal, all of these unknowns and how much structure would be really important. And so I'm wondering from you all, I know you have thoughts about these questions, especially the first one. I'm wondering how many of you are feeling anxious of this work, um, to a place it's not allowing you to really deeply think about the instruction that really should supersede and be one. I'm just wondering where your mindsets are right now. There's no right or wrong answer to that, but I know if I were a principal, I would be thinking how. I would be thinking a lot about the how. What structures I need, what structures did I have in place, who's going to be doing what, and there could be a tendency to not be focused on what really should be at the center, which is how do we improve instruction for the benefit of our students. Is experiencing any of that type of anxiety as it relates to, I just don't even know what we're going to look like, so I'm kind of stuck in even getting to the point of instruction. Again,
Yeah. Is high. um, so yeah, it's to strike a balance between instruction, because I'm at a small school, so my teachers are hyper focused. They are really hyper focused on when we left, like what skills that students didn't get introduced to and what wasn't mastered, and going into this next year. So having a focus on instruction and also trying to focus on what it's going to look like. Yes, but so it's equally, we're trying to look at both, because what we look like and how we're going to structure school is also going to have a direct impact on instruction. So even thinking about, are you going to do traditional? Are you going to do hybrid? Are you going to do virtual? That still has a direct impact on how you do it. So, I mean, we just can't even focus on one without the other. So even in terms of thinking about these structures, because we use, like IXL for, intervention, or we use it for like additional practice. So we know they have a component that would tell us right away, to diagnose like really what skills students are lacking and where they are. That would kind of give us some immediate feedback before, we're scheduled to do like maps that kind of help us to benchmark students and put them in our RTI groups. So we kind of figuring out like, how are we going to know right off the bat before, because, maps is scheduled after maybe 4 or 5 weeks when you get into school.
Right.
So, but we got to know where we're starting from day one. So instruction has to begin like day one. So, anxiety is high.
Yeah, I appreciate you. I appreciate your honesty and you saying that. And one thing that is going to have a direct impact on students. And so I just want to elevate that piece of what you said, because hopefully, well, what I got from that is keeping the main thing, which is instruction. So that structure piece is really important, but don't over dial that piece at the expense of what needs to happen instructionally. Katie, I'm sorry to take us down a different road, but that was coming up for me.
Yeah, no, that was a good road to go down. I think it's important to acknowledge that. And I think what was chatted out too around just and Vaughn, you kind of echoed this too, the idea of like, we need to quickly diagnose students where they're at, figure out where they're at so that we can adjust the curriculum to adjust the pacing guides to help structure that. I was in a meeting the other day with a leader and I said that very same thing. I said, instruction needs to happen from day one. And do you know how many eyebrows around the room, the virtual room, were raised when I said that? Because so much of that first week is based on culture, which is so important, but how can we bring content alongside culture so that we can maximize the time that we have with students? Are there others that want to share? I know we have a few people on the call, Marshana, Jay Brown, Daniel. Anyone want to kind of comment on that conversation? All right, let's transition to the next portion, which is really drilling down into a specific method that we could use to kind of create these instructional recovery plans. And so what we are going to do is navigate towards one approach that goes deeper into how we could recover this learning loss for mathematics instruction specifically. So if you could go ahead and go to the next slide. We consider this process to be a 4-step process to figure out where we call it the bridges up, where schools or where students actually aren't able to access grade level work. The bridge is up, there's somebody crossing underneath them in this river, and there's no way for them to get through. So we need to make sure that we're identifying those prerequisite standards that must be learned before we can engage with that grade level standards. So in the next couple of slides, we're going to walk through each step with an opportunity for us to do a virtual staff and chat. Because Eureka is used in a lot of the schools, we're going to be using those materials as an example, but the approach can be one that you can apply to any curriculum. And we'll also look at the same grade level. So when we think about this, why are we doing this process now? Well, the topics that we didn't teach or teachers didn't get to, go ahead and click next to Mia. They're fresh in our minds. So we know what was covered versus not covered. And if we wait until August to have this conversation, it might not be as fresh. So we also have time right now to plan in preparation for what this instruction and learning loss recovery looks like come August. So we need to take advantage of the time that we have. Next slide, please. So the first step, and there's a lot on this slide, the first step is going to be to identify the focus and foundational standards for each unit of learning. So the focus is that grade level content, the foundation are the prerequisite skills. And what we're going to do is share with you a template in the chat that you can use to record this information. Definitely something that I would bring in your instructional coaches and teachers around. But we want to make sure that we're unpacking these focus standards for the upcoming module and prerequisite skills from the prior grade level. Many schools actually complete this process as part of standards unpacking, but without this intentionality and framing of learning loss recovery, we might fall short of giving our students exactly what they need to access grade level content. So if you can see on the screen here, I know some of you probably are hopping into that template. That template is just for you all to use, but on the screen here, we have, for example, a 5th grade module and focus standards. So you can see NBT standards listed along the left. And then on the right are those prerequisite skills that students will need to have in order to access that grade level content. So I'd love for you all to kind of name, just looking at what you see here, what are some connections you see between the 4th grade prerequisite skills and the 5th grade focus standards? What are you noticing as like a theme, as a through line that's coming out, jumping out at you right now?
Katie, I'm a jump in as a participant. One, because I just love math, but as I'm looking at fourth grade prerequisites and fifth grade module and focus standards, I think one of the things that I see is this idea of recognize, explain. Like, if I'm going down the right road, there's some level of conceptual understanding that's necessary for folks to be successful. And so I see a connection between 4 MBTA1 and 5 MBTA1. But the idea of recognize means something that leads me to think that it's a conceptual portion of the standard.
Mhm. Yeah, and without building that sense about numbers, students are going to struggle with the procedures. I'm glad that you named that, because I think with mathematics instruction, it's important for us to understand that we need to help students understand what they're learning first, being able to reason and grapple with numbers and manipulate numbers in a way that creates a sense about numbers, so that
Yeah.
they can then get to the more efficient aspect of, like, how do I use a standard algorithm to actually solve this problem? And I also understand the why behind why I'm using this algorithm to solve it.
Yeah. And then also I'm seeing, like, if it's for NFC 7, it's saying compare 2 decimals to hundredths. And then I look at 5 MBTA 3, it says read, write, and compare decimals to thousandths. So kids are taking a leap from what they have learned in fourth grade and then applying some of that as they learn new content in that fifth grade standard.
Yep. That's great. And decimals are new in fourth grade. They don't learn decimals before fourth grade. So if they've missed 4 NFC 7, we need to go back and we need to figure out, how do we orient, what do we give them that's going to help them access MBTA 3 in fifth grade. Good. All right. If you want to go ahead and click, we were going to do a stop and jot. If you feel, go ahead and chat. What is one action that you can take just as part of this first step as a leader to support your team? And when I say team, I mean your coaches or your ILT or your teachers. What's one action that you can take? We'll take 1 minute to do that, and then we'll go on to the next step. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Thank you, Vaughn. Step 2. Okay, so step 2 is in the same template that I chatted out to you. And Andrea, I think you kind of spoke to this earlier too. We want to make sure that we are determining which standards are taught in which unit. And so in the example that we just gave on the previous slide, we want to figure out when those fourth grade prerequisite standards were taught. So we'd want to pull up the actual checklist or the curriculum or the scope and sequence from fourth grade, and being able to identify and target where that is. On the screen here, you can see on the left side, we have those prerequisite skills listed, just like we talked about in the previous step. And then the unit is now identified. And so the idea behind this is that teachers are, gathering their diagnostic data, identifying where students are at, and now they have a reference point to say, I need to go back to unit 3 from this fourth grade. I'm going to pull in one lesson or one problem that's going to help students access this fifth grade level content that I'm about to teach. And so the key thing is responding to the data, responding to that diagnostic data, and then pulling in a particular resource. If you have a high quality curriculum, this should be relatively easy to do because you can just go back to the prior grade's curriculum. I see in the chat working closely with curriculum coordinator to review the instructional maps and determine where we need to start from the spring instruction and how to begin grade level instruction for fall. Great. All right, let's go to the next slide. So there is another process here. Step 3, we want to make sure that we are making a list of the standards that we're not able to ensure all students learned in the spring. And so that's using the diagnostic data. This step might not always be possible, but it is best practice. Next year, more than ever, it's critical that teachers are clear about which standards we feel confident that students have learned versus ones we don't have confidence they learned. And that confidence, again, should be rooted in data. The better we can share this info, the better we can serve students. So we can't engage in that grade level content without first mastering those prerequisite skills. So I'm going to chat out a link that you can use as far as a tool for teachers. And what some of the schools that we work with are currently doing. And I know teachers are hopefully happily resting after a crazy chaotic year, but if they are not, and if they still feel impassioned to do so, I would definitely encourage all leaders to have teachers kind of complete some sort of a pass it on plan like we have listed here to determine where there's opportunities for the next grade level teacher to remediate. And so if I am a 4th grade teacher, I am completing this template to say, this is the unfinished learning that has occurred in my classroom. This is something I'm not 100% confident my students have mastery of. And this is also something I want to communicate to the 5th grade teacher. Vaughn, you have a question. How should leaders build these actions into summer PD and or fall in service? Do you want to kind of expand on that?
Yeah, as we're going through this, I'm just thinking about your comment, you know, teachers need a break, principals need a break, probably won't get a break. And I'm just wondering how much of this work, and we don't have to answer it right now, but my wondering is just like how much of this work should be built into what happens during summer PD, and or what happens in days of in-service where you know, it could be a little unfocused. It could be a little like there's a lot that we need to tell you. And if we prioritize this, I feel like teachers can feel like a strong sense of I'm ready to go when school starts. So I'm just wondering, like, how do we build this into ways of work that we know will happen without maybe creating too much additional for folks to do and risk overwhelming them? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question, Vaughn. You know, regardless of tenure of teachers, tenure of your staff, I think there is still a huge opportunity for teachers to engage in learning around coherence. I think a lot of times teachers teach their grade level standards and may understand how to remediate in certain situations, but maybe not in response to misconceptions that are bubbling up in the middle of a lesson. So I think to your question, I think there needs to be some sort of development that happens for teachers this summer before they can even get to this point of remediation. And I think it's around, what does coherence look like? I'm digging into prior grade level standards, my grade level standards, post grade level standards, and I'm understanding the connections between standards and that progression of learning that needs to happen so that when you have that diagnostic data, you understand where your students are at, you sit down to plan that first unit, and you can really pinpoint exactly where within your lessons you need to build in extra supports for students. So again, we are still teaching grade level content, but we are sitting down and figuring out, okay, where within this lesson do I need to build in prerequisite skills now that they've already built their knowledge about what those prerequisite skills could potentially be. Let me pause there. Any reactions to that? Hi, Marshana. Thank you for joining.
Hi there.
You represent over 125 manufacturers and would love to continue the conversation as we prepare for return. So you are a busy lady right now. What is coming up for you, Marshana, as you're hearing this conversation? All right, Marshana, if you're there, feel free to chat in what's coming up for you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Let's.
Could you hear me?
No, okay, go ahead. Yep, go ahead.
Sorry. I was saying that two things are coming up. You know, I as a dealer, representing over 125 lines, but also as a parent. So I hear and understand you all's frustration and concerns of all of that. So I'm thinking about product that we may offer to kind of help. I've been talking with a lot of schools about safety and of what manufacturers are trying to do to help you guys in this regard. I mean, it's definitely the learning is priority. However, for a parent standpoint, safety and what does that look like, and how the school districts are actually preparing for that. So I joined the webinar because I wanted to truly hear. It's not a sales thing, it's more of a genuine concern. And how can I help with safety? And how can I help you guys with what it is? As I'm hearing, you know, you're speaking of, okay, how we're going to do our teaching, but what could that look like? As you were saying, on day one, we need to come in and we need to jump right in and pick up where the kids left off at, and jump in there. But the other part is for a parent to drop their kid off and know, okay, my kid is safe because they've addressed these issues as well. So I'm trying to hear what you guys are saying and thinking of product that I can offer you all to help combat that area as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got you. I so appreciate it. And especially your approach of coming through the lens of I'm a parent. I also have two children that are in school, not K-12 school yet. They're little baby school, but totally understand it and wanting to make sure that's a safe environment for them. I would say where we're kind of navigating today is this idea of learning loss recovery in the scope of what it could look like both virtually and in person. And so the conversation today is definitely around like, this is what instruction should look and feel like. And what we're doing with a lot of our partners right now is also thinking through what would it look and feel like in this virtual space, which is ultimately most likely going to be a viable option in some way, shape, or form. There are going to be students, even if we're back in person, students that need to have this virtual learning as well. So definitely coming at it through the lens of that, but also just focused on what does that instruction look like.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too, just, you know, because we, you know, just like I said, a lot of our manufacturers are thinking that as well, to say, what is it that they need in the technology sense? You know, we know Zoom is a big thing too, but what are the teachers needing to do their jobs well that they may be missing out on, you know, with technology? And so, like I said, I'm truly not here trying to sell anything. I'm really trying to learn and understand and to truly just be a resource. So like if it's something later down the road that, hey, Marshana, what do you guys have in the lines of this? And I'm happy to look to, you know, to just be a resource for you all too. So like I said, I'm truly here just for that, to really understand and learn.
Great. Well, we're glad we're here. Tish, are you there?
Oh yeah,
Okay, we'll see if she
on the line. I know Josh is on the line, and maybe he would want to. Can you hear me, Katie?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I was just gonna say I know Josh is on, so there might be something that he'll follow up around.
Okay.
Sure.
All right, let's go ahead and click to step 4. And we definitely have had pretty extensive conversation around this already. If we're able to go ahead to step 4. Okay, I can voice that over. I'm not sure if it's just a lag for me, but I can voice over. Step 4 is essentially perfect. There it is. It must have just been me. Adjust your pacing calendar. So adding days as necessary, either before or during the module. And modules is what they refer to in Eureka Math. And so there are some suggestions that we have for how to adjust the pacing calendar, because I know it's top of mind for a lot of leaders is we already don't have enough time in this school year. So what could this possibly look like? And if you could go ahead and just click ahead, we have a fun little graphic there. Whoa, we know we can't just add days to an already packed calendar, right? So the next slide has a few recommendations for how we can buy ourselves more time. So go ahead and click. The first is just respecting the calendar that you're about to make. More than ever, we want to make sure that we're really focused but disciplined. A lot of times there are lessons that spill over into multiple days. And so there is a potential target or reason for that. I know specifically with Eureka Math, there are in every lesson must do, can do, and could do problems. And so I think a lot of it is just taking a look at what your curriculum is saying and making sure that you're doing those must do's so that you can really prioritize that time and engage in the highest leverage tasks that are there for students. Next, we also want to recommend that you potentially shorten your time in assessments. So some of the curriculum embedded assessments budget for 3 to 4 days per unit. You could cut this down to 2 or even 1 day. Again, focusing on those must-do problems, what are deeply connected to that focus, that major work of the grade, in order to prioritize that. And third, we can leverage Tier 2 and Tier 3 curriculums and interventions. So this would allow the whole group to move on, while some students who need more targeted support have that opportunity. And then also bringing in, an army of volunteers if possible. And then fourth, tighten late year units. So units on additional and supporting work can be condensed. My other recommendation there is additional and supporting work is very deeply connected to major work of the grade. Additional and supporting work provides opportunities for students to reinforce what they learned in major work of the grade. And so a lot of more integrated curricula actually bring the additional and supporting work alongside major work of the grade. And that could be something that you all do as well in order to kind of recover some time for interventions. So let's go ahead to the next slide and hear from you. What actions are coming up for you? What is something now engaging in this entire process? What is a big rock that you'd like to accomplish to help take your teams and help recover this loss of learning? Let's just share out what is coming to mind for us right now. And I'd love for you to come off mute to share.
This is Andrea. Right now, the action that I plan to take right now is to really have open, honest conversation with my teachers. So, we're beginning that conversation on Monday. It's like, let's be candid, let's really talk, and let's figure out what's the best move we could take as a school. So we're going to start those conversations and see where we are.
Now, you mentioned, Andrea, that your school was small. Do you have an ILT, some members alongside you that you could leverage their support here as well?
So we have grades, K-5, actually, we just got a 5th grade for the next year. And I only have one, pardon me?
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. I only have one grade per level. So it's one kindergarten, one first, up to 5th grade. And I have a curriculum coordinator. So basically, like, that's my team. And of course, we have a counselor. So, team.
Okay. Yeah. So heavily relying on the curriculum coordinator for instructional support for teachers.
Right. So we kind of work together in conversations, and then we come figure out where we need to go, and I might direct direct her to do specific things as far as the curriculum. Like, we were toward the end of this closing this semester, we did the curriculum maps, and so just like we just had a conversation yesterday, and because we haven't she's working on doing the 5th grade map, and she was saying that it was a bit of a struggle because of it's such a little difference from doing the other grades, and also trying to make sure, given the skills that they need and the calendar and the day, how we're trying to juggle and put all those necessary yeah.
Just out of curiosity, what did she name as the struggle for planning for 5th grade? What's kind of coming up for her as a barrier or hurdle there?
I think she said that it was, I guess, the range of skills and the time. And so as I was listening to you all talking about, those things are really, what are the must do's are as opposed to those things that we kind of put in kind of support. So that that may just kind of help her. But she was saying, like, yeah, she said, I've done it, and then I had to go back and to readjust it and to kind of figure out, like, what to how to make sure according to our calendar. So then we kind of look at our calendar and see, like, what events are happening, and then we also try to take into effect, like, we know when of course, when testing comes, and even though we're not sure how that's going to lay out for the year, but also trying to make sure that we hit certain skills before a certain benchmark.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and then we also we don't really kind of go like in like we take it and go from chapter 1 to chapter 15. We try to also arrange in our map, like, when does it make sense to do certain things. So so we try to do that too, so we can make sure that we kind of anchor students into the knowledge. So if they're looking at a social study unit, if it's around voting, then we try to, like, it makes sense maybe do that around like November or something, as opposed to if it comes into the curriculum like January. So we kind of juggle, try to make sure it makes sense, but also try to anchor students.
Just out of curiosity, what curriculum do y'all use for math, Andrea? Eureka. Okay, great. And at the risk of alienating other people on this call, I don't want to just customize this for Eureka, but there are some resources that I'm happy to share with you, or we can hold on this last few minutes around scope and sequence and pacing that Louisiana Department of Ed actually released a couple years back, and basically recommendations for where we could potentially combine or eliminate lessons that might not be deeply connected to major work of the grade, which would help your curriculum coordinator with adjusting those pacing guides for 5th grade. So I'm happy to find those and share those with you before the end of this call if you feel like that would be helpful.
All right, thanks.
Yep. Absolutely. Are there any other thoughts or responses to this question on the screen before we move on?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Daniel from Memphis School of Excellence.
Hi, Daniel.
My question will be a little bit different, and actually I have a question. I'm going to be opening a new school in Cordova, K5. It's going to be a new charter for us. And since they were not our former students, so it's going to be very difficult to just understand their current level of current level for the grade level expectations.
Mhm.
What would you suggest at the beginning of the year? Like, what kind of assessment would you suggest to do to check their level first and take necessary actions based on their current level?
It's a great question, Daniel. Let me ask you one more. Are you opening up with all K-5 students, K1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or just certain grade levels right now?
All K5s.
All K-5. It's a great question, and it's fun, not funny that you asked this, but I'm also working with a school in Atlanta who is also opening up at the same time. And one of the things that we would definitely recommend you do from the beginning is administer a diagnostic assessment. And so specifically a diagnostic for your K2, so a fluency diagnostic. And then for math, you'd also want to administer a math diagnostic assessment. And basically what that would look like is an assessment that assesses prior grade level standards that provide the story for what remediation will need to happen. So for example, if I'm a fourth grade teacher, I would administer a diagnostic assessment, which would assess third grade standards connected to what I'm about to teach. And then there's lots of opportunities, lots of options for diagnostic assessments. I'm happy to give you some more information about some options for what those could potentially look like. I know our team on the call can provide additional information there as well, but that would be right out the gate, not knowing where the students are at, administer a diagnostic assessment. A lot of schools administer some sort of a math or other growth assessment at the beginning of the year that gives data, often data that we report to our charter or our board, but it doesn't necessarily pinpoint exactly where students need support around. And so I would just caution you from saying like, that's not the assessment that's going to really drive instruction, but a diagnostic will. Does that help answer your question, Daniel?
Yeah, I was actually planning to just give math testing, but it's great to hear that you're offering like diagnostic tests, especially for K through second, right? Fluency.
Yes, a fluency assessment for sure for K2. I've seen schools also administer fluency assessments for upper elementary as well, because a lot of times when you have students reading below grade level, it's not an issue of comprehension, it's an issue of fluency. And so how can we help those upper level students actually acquire the phonics instruction that they need to access grade level complex texts? So I wouldn't totally rule that out as well. I think that could still be an option for upper elementary. Great question, Daniel.
If you can just share me the resources that I can use with the chat or like email, it'll be great. So I'm really now looking for different tools to just check their level at the beginning of the year. They're all coming from different schools.
Yep, absolutely. Daniel, if you could just put your email in the chat, and then we can reach out to you directly and share some of those resources with you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next slide and just begin to reflect and close us out. And if there's any additional questions, I'm happy to stay on and answer those. For planning purposes, we want to make sure that teachers are beginning this work around steps 1 through 4 that we just went through in this presentation. And then for leaders, we want to make sure that we're creating a system to determine what learning teachers completed and engaged students around in 1920 and be able to pass that forward. We want to make sure we're reviewing our PLCs and our planning guides, what planning or changes we'll need to make. So thinking about any changes to structures or materials. We want to start personally working through steps 1 through 4. So for example, if you are coaching third grade, you'll want to start working through what that process could look like and feel like for teachers, so you know how to best support them when they're engaging in this work. Feel free to explore some more of the resources that were chatted out today. And if you don't have a pacing calendar, begin with when you're administering your assessments, and then adjust your pacing calendars or create your pacing calendars based on that. sometimes schools that start with this strategy for assessment, beginning with the end in mind, helps us figure out what does pacing look like as far as how we allot ample time for remediation. So let's go ahead and close this out and go ahead and click to the next reflection slide. Go ahead and click one more. Perfect. So for those of you on the call, we really appreciate your engagement today. We have a few questions on the screen. I'm happy to have you respond and reflect to those questions, and or if you have additional questions about this learning loss recovery, instructional recovery plans, thinking about this 4-step process, happy to answer and respond to any questions that are coming to mind. But hopefully today you felt like you've deepened your understanding of what this recovery process could look like for unfinished learning. Also curious to hear from you. How has this actually shifted your understanding of equity, making sure all students have what they need as far as math instruction goes? So feel free to just share out your responses to these questions and or any additional questions you might have. All right, as we wait for any other reflections or questions, I'm also going to send out a link to a blog from our organization around unfinished learning and the difference between unfinished learning and unfinished teaching. It's a really wonderful read, deeply connected to equity and doing what's best for students, and could be a really great tool to begin the conversation with when you're thinking about professional development for teachers. So happy to stay on the line for a few more minutes to answer any questions or closing reflections you may have. Joshua, I know there might be a survey as well. Would you kind of want to speak to that?
I can actually drop the survey now. If you all will please complete this survey. Okay, it's in there now. And let us know. Please give us your feedback and any suggestions, or if you have questions or anything, please put those in there. I'll make sure that we get those to our speakers. So please feel free to complete that and give you some time to do that as well. And thank you all. Thank you, Ms. Mayfield and everyone for your great conversation today. Thank you, Daniel.